The first sighting came on the horizon of the night sky, an unnatural shimmer, a ripple in the stars. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable to the civilian eye, but to Earth's most advanced telescopes, it was a warning. An enormous fleet had entered the solar system, moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. At first, no one dared to believe it. The world had been preparing for years, expecting a distant, abstract threat from the vastness of space. But this was different. This was real. The Turvan's arrival was anything but subtle. Their ships, gargantuan in size and covered in dark, metallic armor, appeared as shadows against the stars. As they emerged from the depths of space, their lead ship, a massive war carrier known as the Ascendant, sent out a singular message to Earth. It was chilling in its simplicity. Surrender, or be wiped from existence. There was no diplomacy, no warning, just a swift, heart-stopping announcement from the alien invaders. The world froze. Nations scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. It wasn't just the sheer scale of the fleet. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of ships in the sky. But the nature of the alien ships themselves. These were not the clumsy, organic-looking ships humanity had seen in the few interactions with extraterrestrial species before. These were cold, calculating war machines, built for one purpose: conquest. Despite Earth's most advanced weaponry, missiles, lasers, and even experimental technologies, none of it made a dent. The alien ships simply shrugged off the attacks, their shields impenetrable, their offensive capabilities devastating. The global powers realize, with a sinking feeling, that Earth's militaries were utterly outclassed. In the ensuing chaos, military leaders convened, and the UN Security Council issued orders for mass evacuation and defense protocols. But there was a deeper, more secretive contingency plan in motion, one few knew about: Project Leviathan. The United States, Russia, China, and the European Union had all secretly pooled their resources over the years, crafting a fleet that was meant to be Earth's ultimate defense in the event of an alien invasion. This fleet, codenamed Leviathan, had been designed with a singular focus in mind: to level the playing field against a superior enemy. But no one truly knew if it would work. The project had always been shrouded in secrecy. It was humanity's last card, one they hoped they would never have to play. But with the Turvans now within Earth's grasp, the time for secrecy was over. It was time to fight. As the world braced itself for an invasion that seemed impossible to withstand, humanity's warships, designed and built in the shadows of Earth's most advanced military bases, were ready to rise. The Leviathan fleet was about to make its mark, rewriting the very rules of war, whether it succeeded or not. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, hidden from the eyes of the public, a secret war was already being waged. In the vast underground complex known as the Forge, teams of the world's brightest minds, engineers, scientists, military strategists, worked relentlessly on humanity's last hope. Their task was clear: develop a fleet capable of holding off the Turvans, a species with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever known. It wasn't just a matter of defense, it was about turning the tide of an impossible war. Project Leviathan, which had been in development for nearly 2 decades, was humanity's ace in the hole. Built in total secrecy, the project had originally been intended for a different kind of warfare, one that might never come to pass. But as the alien fleet drew closer, the decision was made to activate it. In the span of just 72 hours, the culmination of years of innovation and research was finally unleashed. Human warships, equipped with technology and strategies designed to challenge the very essence of Turvan superiority. Each ship in the Leviathan fleet was a work of art and science combined. Their designs were a mixture of cutting-edge human technology and alien principles, some of which had been reverse-engineered from previous extraterrestrial encounters. But humanity had not simply borrowed alien tech, it had improved upon it, twisted it, and made it their own. The ships were equipped with state-of-the-art energy shields, gravity-defying propulsion systems, and weapons that could bend space itself, firing concentrated blasts of energy capable of tearing apart the hulls of enemy ships. The most remarkable feature, however, was the ship's eye. Unlike the alien Tervans, who relied on cold, unfeeling logic, the human warships were built to think and act with the intuition, creativity, and unpredictability of their human crews. Each ship was paired with an artificial intelligence, but these AIs were fused with human consciousness in a way never before attempted, allowing the machines to adapt and learn from their surroundings, making them capable of rapidly evolving in battle. It was humanity's greatest technological achievement, a merging of the organic and synthetic that would level the playing field. The warships were christened with names inspired by myth and history: Cerberus, Ares, Prometheus, and Odyssey, to name a few, each symbolizing humanity's determination and defiance. These ships were designed not to fight with brute force, but with cunning, unpredictability, and surprise. The crews chosen to man them were not just military elites, but pioneers, thinkers, and tacticians, people capable of making impossible decisions in the heat of battle. But even with these new ships, there was no guarantee of success. The Tervans were an enemy unlike any humanity had faced before, and their own fleet was massive. The humans' only advantage was their resourcefulness, a trait they had relied on throughout history to survive, adapt, and innovate. The question remained, would it be enough? As the first ships of Leviathan left their hidden dockyards, emerging from beneath the Earth's surface to rise above the atmosphere, the world held its breath. The fleet was small, just a handful of ships, but their potential was limitless. The time for diplomacy was over. The war was about to begin in earnest, and humanity's fate now rested in the hands of these ships and their crews. The battle for Earth had begun, but it was clear that the real fight would be for humanity's very survival. The Leviathan fleet emerged from the atmosphere, its ships cutting through the dark expanse of space like new gods preparing to challenge the old ones. Their sleek forms gleamed in the starlight, their weapons charged and ready, their AIs humming with anticipation. Earth's leaders watched from the ground, their hopes soaring as the fleet slipped into orbit, positioning itself for humanity's first real strike against the Tervans. The Tervans, however, were not waiting idly. Their fleet had already begun to move, its advanced AI calculating their attack strategy with cold precision. Earth was no longer just a speck in the distance, it was an object to be obliterated. As their dreadnoughts and battle cruisers aligned, readying their devastating weaponry, they expected the humans to fold under the weight of their firepower. The Leviathan fleet was a speck compared to the hundreds of Tervan ships, but they hadn't yet reckoned with humanity's unyielding spirit. The first battle would take place in Earth's outer orbit, an area where the Tervans had set up a blockade to prevent any ships from escaping or entering the planet. The Leviathan fleet knew that a direct assault would be suicidal. They had to strike fast and unpredictable, using the enemy's overconfidence against them. The plan was simple, but risky: divide and conquer. Captain Maya Reynolds of the Cerberus, the lead ship of the fleet, commanded the opening salvo. Her voice, calm and unwavering, echoed through the command deck as she gave the order. Engage evasive maneuvers. Let's make them chase us. The Cerberus dove toward the Tervan fleet, dodging laser blasts and weapons fire as its cloaking system flickered to life. The other ships followed suit, each weaving through the chaos with the agility of predators in their element. The Tervans, relying on their superior firepower and technologically advanced tracking systems, didn't anticipate the human ships' unpredictable movements. They had expected direct confrontation, not guerrilla-style warfare in the cold vacuum of space. The first strike came unexpectedly. The Cerberus dropped out of its cloaking field just long enough to fire a concentrated pulse of energy at one of the Tervan dreadnoughts. The blast hit with a thunderous crack, tearing a hole through the alien ship's shields and knocking out a significant portion of its weaponry. The Tervans immediately retaliated, but the Cerberus was already gone, reappearing hundreds of kilometers away, out of range of the retaliatory fire. The human warships, though small in number, had learned from the alien tactics. They didn't just rely on their own advanced technology. They used their creativity. The AIs guiding the ships were now fully integrated with human intuition, anticipating enemy moves with surprising accuracy and adapting strategies in real time. The battle turned into a game of cat and mouse, with the human fleet staying one step ahead at every turn. For every Turvan ship that went down, 2 more would rush into the fray. The human fleet had the element of surprise, but the Turvans had overwhelming numbers. And yet, the humans didn't back down. As the hours passed, it became clear that the invaders had underestimated humanity's resilience. In a desperate attempt to crush the humans' resolve, the Turvans launched their full assault on Earth's moon, intending to use it as a staging ground for their ground invasion. The Leviathan fleet had anticipated this move, and before the Turvans could complete their objective, the human warships struck in tandem, intercepting the alien forces just outside the lunar surface. A critical moment arrived as Captain Reynolds watched a massive Turvan ship head straight for the Cerberus. With its shields flickering, the odds of survival were slim. But there was no hesitation in her voice as she ordered, "Prepare for a last-ditch attack. All hands, brace for impact." As the Turvan ship closed in, Reynolds executed a bold maneuver, slamming the Cerberus into a full-speed collision course with the alien vessel. The human warship's reinforced hull scraped against the Turvan dreadnought, and in that split second, the crew released an EMP blast that sent ripples through the enemy ship's systems. For a heartbeat, the Turvans were blind, disoriented. The ship exploded in a spectacular burst, leaving behind only debris. The victory was hard-earned. The Leviathan fleet had taken significant losses, but they had proven something vital. The Turvans were not invincible. Humanity had held its ground, and against all odds, made its first strike a success. The battle was far from over, and the cost of survival was already apparent. But the message had been sent. Humanity was no longer the prey in this war. They had become the hunters. The initial victory was a bitter one. The Leviathan fleet had struck the Turvans a significant blow, but the cost had been high. Several warships were heavily damaged, and the Cerberus, though intact, had sustained crippling damage to its engines and weapon systems. For all the triumphs, humanity had only scratched the surface of the Turvans' overwhelming power. To survive, they would need more than ingenuity. They would need allies. It was during the brief interlude between the skirmishes that Captain Maya Reynolds was summoned to an encrypted meeting with an unlikely emissary, a being known as Elira, a high-ranking member of the Corellans. The Corellans, once thought to be a myth, were a mysterious race that had long hidden from galactic conflict, preferring isolation. Few knew of them, and fewer still had heard of their remarkable stealth technology, a breakthrough that could potentially change the course of the war. They were peaceful by nature, unwilling to involve themselves in the destruction sweeping through the galaxy, but the Turvans' approach had forced their hand. "We have watched your struggle, Captain Reynolds." Elira's voice echoed through the secure communication channel, her image flickering into view on the holoscreen. She was humanoid in shape, with iridescent skin that shimmered faintly like a starless night sky, and her eyes were deep pools of liquid silver. "Your courage is remarkable, but you face an enemy whose understanding of warfare far surpasses your own. You will need more than courage to defeat them." Reynolds, though wary of alliances, understood the weight of the words. "What do you propose?" Elira's eyes softened. "We offer our assistance, in exchange for a shared knowledge of tactics. You need not be alone in this fight." The Corellans had the ability to cloak entire fleets, rendering them invisible to even the most advanced enemy sensors. Their ships were built for silence, speed, and subtlety. Everything humanity's Leviathan fleet needed to level the playing field. In exchange, they asked for something humanity could provide: the tactical advantage of human unpredictability, something the Corellans had never mastered. Their strategies were brilliant, but they lacked the ability to think outside the box, to adapt to chaotic situations. The Corellans had mastered the art of war, but it was a cold, calculated form of battle that lacked the human touch. Your knowledge of unconventional tactics, your creativity in the face of adversity, that is what we need, Elira continued. Together, we can defeat the Turvins. Captain Reynolds felt the weight of the decision. Trusting another species with humanity's fate was a gamble, one fraught with uncertainty. Yet as she looked at the shattered remnants of the battle just fought, the decision became clear. Alone, humanity would never stand a chance against the Turvins. But with the Corellans' technology and humanity's ingenuity, the balance could be tipped in their favor. "We accept your offer," Reynolds said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling in her mind. "Let's fight together." Within days, the Leviathan fleet began integrating the Corellans' advanced cloaking technology. It was a risky move. Humanity had never fully understood the science behind the Corellans' stealth tech, but necessity pushed them forward. A new type of warfare was born, the invisible strike. The Corellans would cloak the human ships while they launched surprise attacks on the Turvan supply lines and key military installations. The first operation under the new alliance was a resounding success. The human ships, now capable of vanishing in plain sight, struck deep into Turvan territory, hitting command centers, supply depots, and shipyards. The Turvins, who had once believed their fleet was impervious, were caught off guard by the sudden onslaught. The attacks were swift and disorienting, and for the first time, the invaders found themselves reeling. It wasn't just about technology, however. It was about strategy, human ingenuity at its finest. As the Corellans began to teach humanity their methods of silent warfare, humanity taught the Corellans how to think outside the box, to anticipate the unpredictable. The partnership between the two species was one of necessity, but it also brought forth a powerful synergy. The Turvins, now facing an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't predict, began to falter. The unrelenting strikes from the human Corellan alliance left them disoriented, unable to fully coordinate their vast fleet. But while the alliance was proving effective, Reynolds knew they were not yet out of danger. The Turvins would adapt. They always did. What was certain now, however, was that humanity's warships were no longer fighting alone, and the game had just changed. The battle for Earth was far from over, but with the Corellans at their side, humanity finally had a fighting chance. The human Corellan alliance was beginning to reshape the battlefield, but despite the successes of their stealth strikes, the Turvins remained relentless. Each victory, no matter how significant, came at a cost. The Turvins, now aware of humanity's unexpected resilience, were adapting quickly. Their fleets became more organized, more dangerous, and they began deploying new countermeasures that threatened to overwhelm the Leviathan fleet's advantage. Humanity was running out of time. It was in this moment of uncertainty that a bold plan was conceived, a high-risk, high-reward mission to infiltrate the very heart of the Turvan fleet. Captain Maya Reynolds and her crew aboard the Cerberus were tasked with leading the operation. The goal was clear: find and disable the central command hub of the Turvan fleet, the Ascendant, their massive flagship, which served as both their command center and the nexus of their strategic decisions. If the Ascendant could be destroyed or captured, the entire Turvan operation could be crippled. The Cerberus, still wounded from the previous battles but operational, was the perfect ship for the mission. With the Corellan stealth technology and humanity's innovative tactics, they planned to infiltrate the heart of Turvan territory, past their most heavily defended sector. The fleet's best engineers had made significant modifications to the human ships, enhancing their cloaking systems to evade even the Turvan's advanced detection. It was a long shot, but it was humanity's best hope. The mission began under the cover of darkness, with the Leviathan fleet splitting into two groups. The first would launch a series of decoy strikes to draw attention and mislead the Turvins, while the second would insert the Cerberus and a handful of other warships deep into enemy lines. The plan was to remain invisible until the last possible moment. Reynolds watched as the Cerberus slipped into the black void of space, its hull humming with barely contained energy. The stealth technology was working perfectly. No sign of the Turvan's tracking systems had detected them. The warship sailed silently, a ghost in the night, as the crew prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. Every decision, every move would have to be perfect. One misstep, and they would be wiped out in an instant. The journey to the Turvan command hub took hours, each moment laced with tension. As they neared the Ascendant, the fleet split into two groups. The first group, led by the Cerberus, would infiltrate the inner defense ring. The second would continue to distract the Turvans and create a diversion, drawing their attention away from the true objective. But as they approached the heart of Turvan space, a shocking discovery was made. The Turvans were not just focused on Earth. They were preparing for a galactic-scale assault, gathering forces from all over the galaxy. The Ascendant was a mere decoy. The real target was much worse, a massive doomsday device, capable of destroying entire star systems, was being built on the outskirts of Turvan space. The Turvans were preparing to unleash an extinction-level weapon that would annihilate entire planets, Earth included. Reynolds understood the gravity of the situation. If the Ascendant was only the beginning, then this new weapon was their endgame. If the Cerberus could disable the Doomsday device before it was completed, they could stop the Turvan's plans for galactic domination, and perhaps win the war once and for all. But there was no time for hesitation. Reynolds issued the order, her voice firm and resolute. "Prepare for a direct strike. We don't stop until that weapon is disabled." With a synchronized effort, the Cerberus and its sister ships launched their attack, weaving through Turvan defenses with the skill of 1,000 calculations. The enemy, caught off guard by the audacity of the strike, began scrambling to retaliate. But the human warships were relentless, striking with pinpoint accuracy and forcing the Turvans to divert their resources to defending the new weapon. As they closed in on the Doomsday device, a fierce battle erupted. Turvan ships surged forward to intercept, but humanity's ingenuity shone through once again. The human ships used a combination of evasive tactics, pulse blasts, and precise targeting to breach the perimeter of the facility. The tension was unbearable. Each minute felt like an eternity, the outcome uncertain. Finally, in the heart of the facility, the team aboard the Cerberus discovered the device, a massive structure designed to harness the energy of a dying star. The humans had no time to waste. They deployed an experimental EMP pulse, hoping to disable the weapon long enough for their final strike. The results were immediate. A surge of energy rippled through the Turvan facility as the device's systems faltered. The weapon was vulnerable, but not yet destroyed. The Cerberus launched a final attack, a concentrated energy beam that cut through the heart of the device, causing a cataclysmic explosion that tore through the facility. The Turvan's Doomsday weapon was no more. The destruction of the Turvan's Doomsday weapon sent shockwaves through their entire fleet. The explosion was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological blow that rattled their entire chain of command. The Cerberus and its allies had struck at the heart of the Turvan war machine, crippling their ultimate weapon and forcing them to reevaluate their strategy. But it also marked a turning point in the war, one that would demand everything from humanity and their newfound allies. Captain Maya Reynolds watched from the command deck of the Cerberus, her face illuminated by the flickering screens showing the aftermath of the explosion. The Turvans had been thrown into disarray, but the battle was far from won. As the remnants of their fleet regrouped, Reynolds knew the Turvans would retaliate with brutal force. The war was escalating into something far larger, and now humanity had to take full advantage of the momentum. "This is it," Reynolds said, turning to her crew. "We've shown them we can hurt them, but now we need to finish this. We can't let them recover." The Leviathan fleet had already launched a series of coordinated strikes across the Turvan front lines, taking advantage of their disarray. With the Doomsday weapon gone, the Turvans had lost their edge, and the human fleet began systematically targeting their remaining command ships, supply lines, and planetary strongholds. But there was a twist. The Tervans, no longer confident in their absolute superiority, unleashed a new terror, the Hypernova fleet. These were ships that defied all understanding of physics, massive, destabilizing warships capable of manipulating gravity fields to create miniature supernova. It was a desperate final gambit to retake control of the war. The threat they posed was unlike anything humanity had faced before. The Hypernova fleet arrived with the intensity of a cosmic storm, their gravitational weapons wreaking havoc as they pulled entire fleets into collapsing orbits, destroying them with a single gravitational wave. The first signs of their arrival were terrifying. Planets began to tremble, and the edges of stars began to twist unnaturally. This was a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of obliterating entire systems. The Tervans had chosen to fight with their most dangerous weapon, and humanity would have to find a way to counter it. The stakes had never been higher. If the Hypernova fleet succeeded, Earth and every other colony humanity had established in the galaxy would be erased from existence. The Leviathan fleet knew that this was their ultimate test. If they failed now, there would be no second chance. Captain Reynolds gathered her senior officers in the war room, her mind focused on the road ahead. We need to find a way to neutralize these Hypernova ships. If they fire their gravity weapons, we're finished. But they can't target us if we're out of their reach. Reynolds had a plan, one born from the lessons humanity had learned over the course of the war. They would need to strike with both precision and unpredictability, using the Corellan stealth technology to hit in close without being detected. But more than that, they needed to hit the Hypernova fleet's control nexus, the core command center that directed the gravitational weapons. If they could disable the command hub, they could nullify the Hypernova ship's firepower and force the Tervans to retreat. The Cerberus, alongside the Corellan's cloaked ships, moved into position as the Hypernova fleet moved toward Earth. Their approach was careful, a deadly dance through the debris of destroyed fleets and falling asteroids. As they neared the control nexus, they began encountering Tervan scouts, smaller vessels designed to detect stealth technology. But the Leviathan ships were quick, moving with brutal efficiency to disable these scouts before they could sound the alarm. At the core of the Hypernova fleet's command hub, a deadly standoff began. The Cerberus and its allies were within striking distance of the control nexus, but the Tervans had set up a defense perimeter so tight that it seemed almost impossible to break. The Hypernova ships hovered nearby, waiting for the signal to unleash their destructive power. It was a race against time. One wrong move, and humanity's final hope would be lost. Reynolds knew that if they were going to survive, they had to take the fight directly to the heart of the Tervan fleet. With her mind set on victory, she ordered the strike. All ships, go dark. Prepare to hit them hard. In that moment, the Leviathan fleet surged forward, moving faster and more decisively than ever before. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of all humanity. The Leviathan fleet moved with purpose, their ships cloaked in Corellan's technology, as they closed in on the Tervan control nexus. Captain Reynolds stood at the heart of the strategy, her eyes locked onto the holographic display that showed the enemy's movements. The stakes had never been higher. The Hypernova fleet was on the cusp of unleashing its devastating power, and only a few minutes separated them from the fate of the galaxy. Reynolds' voice was steady but urgent as she addressed her crew. We strike fast. We hit hard. We do not stop until we've taken down that command center. Our future depends on this. The gravity of the situation was not lost on anyone aboard the Cerberus or the rest of the fleet. They were about to take their most dangerous gamble yet, right into the heart of the Tervan war machine. If they failed, the Tervan's gravitational weapons would wipe them out, and the war for Earth would be over. The Leviathan ships, still cloaked, weaved through the dense rings of debris left by the previous battles, taking advantage of the cover to close the distance between them and the Hypernova fleet. The Cerberus led the way, its weapons primed, its engines roaring silently in the void. The command nexus, located within the flagship of the Hypernova fleet, was heavily shielded. To breach it would take precision and absolute timing. One wrong move, and the enemy would detect them, triggering the activation of their devastating weaponry. As they neared the Nexus, Reynolds' thoughts raced. She knew that this mission had no room for error. Her crew, the Corellans, and the very future of humanity were all in this together. There would be no retreat, no fallback. The choice was simple: win or lose everything. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. The Leviathan ships would distract the outer perimeter of the Hypernova fleet, drawing their fire while the Cerberus would strike directly at the command nexus. Once they breached the perimeter, it would be a direct assault on the heart of the Tervan fleet, targeting their central control systems, leaving the Hypernova ships blind and powerless. At Reynolds' signal, the Leviathan fleet sprang into action. The cloaked ships broke from their formation, launching a flurry of attacks that rang out in sharp, disorienting bursts. The Tervan's automated defense systems fired back immediately, unaware of the true scope of the assault. The human ships moved quickly, staying one step ahead as they continued to outmaneuver the enemy's fire. On board the Cerberus, Reynolds and her crew held their breath as they neared the Nexus. The control hub loomed ahead, a behemoth surrounded by an impenetrable field of Tervan ships. The Cerberus surged forward, a streak of light against the backdrop of the dark void. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down as Reynolds focused on the task at hand. "Now," Reynolds said, her voice tight with focus. The Cerberus's weapons fired in quick succession, precision strikes designed to disable the outer shields of the command hub. The ship jolted as blasts of energy shot toward the Nexus, but the shields held. The enemy retaliated immediately, launching a devastating wave of energy blasts that rattled the Cerberus, nearly tearing the hull apart. But Reynolds wasn't about to back down. "Give me everything we've got," she commanded. In the final moments, the Cerberus's AI, fused with human ingenuity, made a daring choice. It switched to manual override, and with a sudden jolt, the ship executed a high-risk maneuver. It slid into the heart of the Tervan defense grid, bypassing several layers of fire to deliver a decisive blow to the Nexus. The result was immediate. A massive shockwave sent ripples through the enemy fleet. The Nexus, the heart of the Hypernova fleet's command, went dark. The gravitational weapon systems powering the Hypernova fleet sputtered, their energy reserves drained. For the first time, the Tervans were completely vulnerable. "Now," Reynolds shouted. With the Nexus disabled, the Leviathan fleet took full advantage. The remaining human warships, now fully visible and unimpeded by the enemy's once impenetrable defenses, opened fire with everything they had. The Tervan's once mighty war machine was crumbling, its ships falling one by one, as the coordinated strikes tore through their ranks. The tide had turned. The Tervans, for the first time since their invasion of Earth, found themselves on the back foot. Their overwhelming numbers and technology had failed them, their hubris undone by human resilience and innovation. Reynolds watched as the flagship of the Hypernova fleet began to break apart, its once proud form shattering into pieces under the relentless barrage. The final battle was upon them, and humanity's ships pressed forward, their mission nearly complete. But the war was not over yet. With the destruction of the Nexus, the Tervans were now leaderless, but the remnants of their fleet remained, a lingering threat that would need to be dealt with once and for all. Reynolds knew this wasn't just a victory, it was a stepping stone. The last chapter of the war was about to be written, and humanity would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The Leviathan fleet surged forward, the final assault on the Tervans now in full swing. The destruction of their command nexus had thrown the enemy into chaos, but the fight was far from over. The remnants of the Hypernova fleet, though leaderless, were still formidable. Massive ships bristling with weapons, and the Tervan's terrifying ability to manipulate gravity remained a deadly force. But humanity's resolve had never been clearer. They had turned the tide of the war once already, and they would do it again. Captain Maya Reynolds stood at the helm of the Cerberus, watching as the remaining Turvan ships attempted to regroup, their once imposing formations now fractured and scattered. The human warships, bolstered by the Corellan's advanced stealth technology, had the advantage in both speed and unpredictability. The Turvan's attempts to regain control were desperate but futile. All ships, coordinate fire. "We finish this," Reynolds ordered, her voice calm but brimming with the weight of everything they had endured to get here. The Leviathan fleet opened fire, their weapons blazing with unrelenting fury. The Turvan's remaining ships attempted to retaliate, their gravity-based weaponry pulling debris and asteroids into violent trajectories, but the human ships were too quick, too adaptive. They evaded the incoming blasts with expert precision, exploiting every weakness they could find in the enemy's crumbling defenses. For the first time in the war, it was clear that humanity had outclassed their invaders. The Turvan's once unbeatable fleet had become a shadow of its former self. The Leviathan ships, along with their Corellan allies, pressed the advantage, focusing their fire on the remaining Hypernova-class warships. Each strike was a hammer blow, each battle a testament to human resilience. But in the depths of space, a singular figure aboard the Turvan flagship watched as his empire crumbled. Commander Girak, the Turvan leader who had once believed the galaxy was theirs for the taking, felt the weight of defeat pressing down upon him. His forces were scattered, his fleet shattered. The human alliance had proven more resourceful, more unpredictable than he had ever imagined. With a final, bitter expression, Girak made his choice. "This war ends now," he muttered, his claws moving quickly across the control panel. The final, most devastating weapon of the Turvans, the vortex cannon, a weapon capable of creating black holes, was about to fire. If the Turvans were to fall, they would take everything with them. But Reynolds, ever vigilant, had anticipated this final gambit. Her eyes locked onto the flickering display, showing the incoming data. The Turvan flagship was preparing to fire. "Brace for impact," she ordered, her heart racing. "All ships, engage evasive maneuvers now." It was a race against time. The vortex cannon, capable of destabilizing entire systems, was primed. The human fleet had only moments to stop it before the weapon could be unleashed. But they had no choice. If they didn't destroy the flagship now, Girak would wipe out everything humanity had fought for. Reynolds took a deep breath, her fingers flying across the console, her mind calculating the risk. "All ships, fire on my mark." The Cerberus darted through the incoming barrage, its engines pushing it to its limits. The Leviathan ships followed in a precise formation, taking advantage of the Turvan's momentary disarray. They closed the distance between themselves and the flagship, their weapons locking onto the weak points of its defenses. "Mark," Reynolds shouted. In an instant, the Leviathan fleet fired everything they had: energy blasts, torpedoes, and precision strikes. The first salvo ripped through the Turvan flagship's shields, and the second shattered its hull. But the Turvans, desperate to take the human fleet down with them, still had the vortex cannon ready to fire. But it was too late. The Cerberus delivered a final decisive blow to the flagship's core, piercing through its defenses and disabling the vortex cannon before it could charge fully. A massive explosion erupted from within the Turvan flagship, sending debris flying in all directions. The once mighty Turvan fleet was no more. In the aftermath of the explosion, silence descended upon the battlefield. The human fleet remained, battered but victorious. The Turvans, with their immense power, had been brought to their knees. The galaxy had been saved. Reynolds allowed herself a moment of reflection as the realization of their victory settled in. They had done it. Humanity had not just survived. They had triumphed. Against all odds, they had proven that no invader, no matter how advanced, could stand against the determination and ingenuity of humankind. As the Cerberus slowly drifted away from the wreckage of the Turvan fleet, Reynolds took a deep breath. The war had cost them dearly, but it had forged humanity into something stronger. They were no longer just survivors. They were the defenders of their galaxy, their home, and their future. "Mission complete," she said, her voice full of pride. "We've earned our place among the stars." And as the Leviathan fleet sailed into the vastness of space, humanity's legacy was sealed. They had rewritten the rules of war, and the galaxy would remember their names forever.